Hello again, everyone. My name is Derailious, and Skyblock 1.0 was announced about 4 years ago now in September of 2021, and a lot in the game has changed since this thread and the many threads afterwards came out. I wanted to take a little bit of time today to go over these threads, kind of talking about how much in Skyblock 1.0 has actually been released already, how close are we to a potential 1.0 release. Obviously, we're not going to be getting some sort of major expansion anytime soon to the game, but a lot that was discussed in these threads has already come to fruition. So I wanted to discuss a little bit about that, how Skyblock is going to continue to develop over the next year or 2 years, and what that means for the game as a whole. Before we begin, as per usual, make sure to like and subscribe. Use code RAIL on the Hypixel store for 5% off your order. You guys have been crazy with it recently. Let's get started. I'm not going to go over literally everything within this thread. I feel like that would be completely ridiculous. I've already talked about this stuff 100 times before, but what I am going to go over are these 4 major pillars: the social aspect of Skyblock, creativity, the progression, and the economy-based game. Kind of talk about where the game is at in terms of these 4 pillars that they discuss here, and where I think it's likely to go in the near future. So to start off, we have the social aspect of the game, and the admin's right. When you enter the portal at the start of the game, you enter a social game with many great aspects, but also some darker ones. The goal is to enhance the positives, remove or change mechanics that cause toxic behaviors, and ensure that you are happy to see players around you during normal play. I feel like this one's a bit of a mixed bag, especially recently. I think they've done a lot of good in this respect. I think fishing is a lot more social than it used to be a few years back. With many of the new sea creatures and changes there, I think they've done a good job of making you want to be around other people for that. You know, they've added certain things like Bob and Time. I think is one of the things that wasn't really around at 2021 that really incentivizes you to be around other people. But in other ways, I feel like they've kind of dropped the ball. Like the Kudra revamp, I feel like is extremely top heavy in terms of your information, your knowledge. If you don't know everything about the fight, you're not going to be able to contribute meaningfully, and you're cooked, and it's not going to be a fun experience for anyone on your team. Similar in Dungeons, although they are trying to rectify that a little bit with Dungeon Breaker, which I'm very glad to see. I think Dungeon Breaker is a great step in the right direction, but fundamentally, Dungeons is still an experience where if you don't know everything about the dungeon to start out with, you're not going to be able to succeed super easily in Party Finder. That's a problem that we hear all the time. Players are in Party Finder, they don't know what they're doing, they're ruining my runs, etc. So that is an issue for the admins to eventually look at, I imagine, but probably not something on the docket anytime soon. In terms of the positive aspects, making sure players feel excited to see each other, I don't really know what they're going to be doing about this in the near future. I think they're trying with foraging, like with tree gifts, to make it so, if someone's in your route, it's not going to be as negative because you'll share the reward, so to speak. But at the same time, it does hurt efficiency. If someone's in my route when I'm foraging, they're going to be lowering the amount of logs I'm breaking per hour. It's going to be a frustrating experience. So I don't know how the admins are going to balance a system in which, players all have their routes, their optimizations, but also they want players to feel happy upon seeing each other. I don't know what you're reasonably going to be doing to try to save something like that and make that system super fun, super enjoyable, to get groups together and make them really excited. They have some things that are pretty excitable in that regard, like Diana, I think, is a big success over the last few years, definitely one of the more positive social aspects of the game. And also, at the same time, there's stuff like cheating and ratting, which have become really only more prevalent as time has gone on. I think ratting makes a lot of people just fully disengage from each other. I hope that something like 2FA is eventually looked at for Skyblock. I think that would be a big step forward. The YouTubers all have it. I don't see why they can't give it to everybody. I feel like something like that would do a lot of good in that regard. But regardless, I just feel like the game is kind of in this weird state where some parts are very, very social. Some parts are very, very good in that respect. Some parts aren't. All right, then we have pillar number 2, which is the concept of creativity and gameplay creativity. Players should be able to do whatever they want. If you want to be the top potato player on the server, that is your choice. The game should enable players to diversify in their gameplay based on preferences and creativity. Your combat playstyle or your activity shouldn't be forced on you due to an overarching meta. Your choices should be varied. So I think they've mostly succeeded at this, other than combat specifically. I think combat, its balance, its meta, has just gotten more stratified over the past 4 years. You know, players know what works nowadays. You know what I mean? Players understand this is a good item. This is a good enchantment. You're going to be wanting to use this. You need this MP. You need this pet. To the point where I would argue in some cases it's actually driven me away from caring about combat. Things are so stratified. The meta has been so stagnant over the past 3 years that it's just hard for me to really get into it. In other regards, though, in other parts of the game, I think they've done a good job of creating new things to do and new things on offer, even if I don't love literally all of it. Obviously, the garden came out after this. I think allowed people to do a lot more in terms of farming. There's pests, which I think are pretty great. And then there's hunting as well as foraging, which I think are excellent. They've done a great job in terms of fishing, adding new types of fishing, new places to fish, new things to fish. So I think overall in this regard, they've done a great job of expanding the creativity in terms of what you're actually able to do within the game. However, they do need to keep looking at things like combat balance. I think this game lives and dies on combat. And if all the players really have to do are slayers, which frankly, they're fun, but some of the bosses are not the most interesting, and dungeons and Kudra, I think there needs to be something else there, like a hardcore maybe solo boss for players to do, some sort of delve boss for players to participate in. Maybe large group bosses should be more appealing. I don't know. Regardless, there definitely needs to be more done, but I think they've made a lot of positive steps over the past few years. The third concept here is progression, where the team specifically states that there are instances in Skyblock where players feel forced to grind content that isn't exhilarating for little rewards. And the idea is that if there is grindy content in the game, there should always be an interesting aspect that can appeal to some or many players, and progression should always be rewarding. I think they've made a lot of progress on this recently. Foraging, I think the progression was really good. Obviously, it's only the first island. It's not super endgame yet. It's very quick. But I think it was fun. I think it was really enjoyable. And getting through hunting, I think, is actually not that bad either. I mean, on Iron Man, it's a little bit worse, obviously. But on a main profile, it's great. And I think even on Iron Man, the foraging experience is pretty great. Fishing has only gotten better over the past year or two. I think the only real standout complaint I have here is in terms of farming. And even with regard to farming, I think it's going to get a lot better in the near future when they make the greenhouse update. So I think they've actually done a pretty good job at this, at trying to make players feel excited for new content. Obviously, there's the side of the endgame player, which I do understand. You know, if you're currently endgame, right, and you feel like the team has nerfed content or they've made things easier, and you're like, you know, why should I grind this game out when in the future, you know, things are going to become easier. I do understand that frustration, that pain point, but I think also there's the side of, if the admins never changed anything in this regard, you know what I mean? If they decided to keep things the same pretty much forever in terms of what was really a problem beforehand, I think a lot more people would have quit over a long period of time, especially with regard to early game stuff, mid game stuff. Players don't want to be sitting for 400 hours and mining diamonds in the mid game. They just don't. And that's one of the problems right now that we see, is that, like, for Iron Man players, money making is just diamond mining. It's just you're sitting there and you're mining some more, and you're doing it even more. And that's not very enjoyable. That's not very fun. The progression in that regard doesn't feel great. That's why we're getting, hopefully, an Iron Man W's in the near future. But regardless, I think they're definitely looking at a lot more improvements for stuff like this. The progression is always something that's, like, in process of being fully developed. I imagine we'll see more developments in the near future, but hopefully we get some, you know, new information about this sometime in the near future. So the last pillar here that they discuss is something that doesn't actually really apply for Iron Man players, which is the idea that Skyblock is a coin-based economy and most items can be sold or traded, and they believe that it's a vital part of the game. Now, if I'm being completely honest with you, I don't really feel like they've done that incredibly at managing the economy as a whole. Recently, there's been a lot of deflation, which isn't necessarily the best for player perception. There should always be some amount of, very low amount, mind you, like, of inflation in a video game, in my view. Probably about 2 to 3% per month is my view on what inflation should be in a video game. The reason why I believe that is because it really does excite a player to log on and see that the items that they've already accomplished and already gotten have become more expensive over time. You don't want it to be too crazy, you know, you don't want 50% inflation in 1 month, which is what we were getting for a long period of time in the middle of, I think, like last year or 2 years ago. There was a lot of heavy inflation. But now prices are starting to fall very, very significantly. And I think that's fundamentally a good thing in some regards. Like, certain items were a little bit overpriced in my view, especially items that are very necessary to progression. But now I think it's starting to become a little bit of a problem that is affecting the excitement of players. You know what I mean? Where players are logging in, they're seeing my net worth dropped $1 billion, my net worth dropped 500 million. Obviously, it doesn't really matter. They still own all these items. You know what I mean? They're not planning on selling them. At least most players aren't. But it still is a hit to the mental, and I do understand why players get frustrated about that. I digress about the economy point, though. That's kind of a separate thing. I think that they are trying their best at keeping the economy as chill and relaxed as possible after many, many dupes and many, many issues over the past few years. I think they're doing all right, all things considered. I wonder if they still agree with this, though. Like, do they agree that the economy is, like, a very important thing still? Like, would they consider this a pillar? Because I don't think they would consider this a pillar anymore. With the Iron Man playstyle becoming much more prominent, I think it should be much more progression-based rather than economy-based, at least is my view. I'm not going to go ridiculously in depth on each of these 1.0 design threads because a lot of what's in these threads were just ideas, and many of them have already come to fruition, like the garden, Skyblock levels, museum, etc. Like, a lot of that stuff has already happened. I more so want to discuss how close we are to something like 1.0, not really in terms of like a major release, so to speak, but just the game being quote-unquote done. I don't think Skyblock is ever going to be done. I don't think most MMOs could ever be quote-unquote done. But in terms of getting out of prototype, I think that the admins have done a great job so far of adding content, expanding on the game. They just need a little bit more of a push, in my view, to actually make some more substantial content that gets people actually excited. You know what I mean? Content in 2021 was really being held up by events, which were a lot of FOMO-based things, like the Technoblade event, the Dante event, double XP weekends. The pandemic was obviously around, so a lot of people were playing, and it was also being held up by dungeons, of course, and to a degree, the mining content was pretty solid. Nowadays, players kind of understand the loop of how content is being released. The admins have done yet less in terms of teasers and less in terms of development blogs, usually. I mean, recently we got the Greenhouse one, which was great, but aside from that, we haven't heard a ton about the specifics of these future pieces of content that we're getting, and players just want to see results, you know what I mean? Hopefully the team is able to deliver in terms of getting players the results that they want. I know that there's a lot that I would be very excited about if it dropped tomorrow. Guardian Slayer is very exciting. Lotus Atoll is exciting. Future mining content is great. The idea of forging 2 and 3, great. Players just understand at this point, you know, how much we're getting. And I think a lot of people are kind of jaded with the current state of things, whether that be because they don't find the content itself that interesting, or because they're not really feeling it in terms of the direction of the game. Players just want to see something be thrown together, and hopefully the team is able to keep up with their ideas that they talk about here. Something I specifically think they need to look at in the future, and it's not really on their threads or in their future design notes, is a combat rebalance. I feel like that's the type of thing where, left unchecked, if you have a meta that's really out of hand or that's really just damaging to the game as a whole, players just stop caring about combat, and it becomes a lot harder to develop combat content. Because of how much damage we're doing outside and inside of dungeons, because a lot of mobs and damage in Skyblock is either you kill in one shot everything or you get one shot by everything, it can be really hard to design content around that sort of play style or around those types of players, so to speak, you know? Like, how are you going to make a Slayer interesting if half the community just dies in one hit and the other half one-shots the boss? That's something for the team to answer and look into. I hope that they're able to do so. I think 1.0 is going to be, if I had to guess, 2027. I don't think it's going to be happening in the next year. I'm going to keep it a buck. I think that they need to really try to figure out how they want to market this game, how they want players to hear about it. Get out there, do some more community outreach. Especially recently, it's felt like things have been pretty silent internally. I hope that changes. But I'm tentatively excited I'm a little less excited than I would have been a year ago. I think this year has kind of bummed me out a little bit on Skyblock. Not in terms of the content itself, like the content's been great. I've been enjoying what I've gotten, but I feel like they announced so much at the beginning of the year, and things have kind of just slowed down. Even though after the foraging update, things were supposed to speed up. Maybe that's me being a little bit greedy, but I mean, it is my job to talk about these things. I would love to hear what you guys think about everything I talked about in this video. I feel like it's very interesting to go back in these old threads every once in a while and reread them and see where the admins were at the time. I would love to see an update to something like this. Where do they feel like they're at? You know what I mean? Do they feel like they've made a ton of progress on these goals, or do they feel like they still have a lot more work to do? Let me know what you think in the comments down below. Look to the future, fellas, and I'll see you then.